The moment her heel pressed down on his back, the entire lobby went silent in the kind of horror that makes people forget how to breathe, and the janitor on his knees did not scream, did not curse, did not even flinch the way a normal man would. He just closed his eyes and whispered one sentence so quietly nobody heard it. He said, "This is the last day you will ever look at me like this." The bucket lay tipped on its side, soapy water spreading across the polished marble like a stain of shame, and the man in green scrubs and a white apron stayed on his hands and knees, yellow gloves soaked, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. His red bandana was tied tight, his face lowered, and even though his whole body was in the position of a servant, there was something in him that did not feel like surrender. It felt like restraint. Standing over him in a navy dress, designer heels, and sunglasses that looked too expensive for an indoor lobby, was a black woman who moved like she owned the building. Her name was Brielle Hart, Senior Director of Operations at Virelli Global, a $100 billion corporation with towers in 5 countries, a private airport hangar, a research division that had contracts with governments, and a board that could shake markets with a single meeting. Brielle was respected, feared, admired. And today, in front of executives, assistants, interns, and security, she was humiliating a janitor like he was less than a person. She laughed while people watched. She smiled like cruelty was confidence. And the worst part was this. The janitor was her husband. His name was Darius Hart. And nobody in that lobby knew that Darius Hart was not just her husband. He was the multi-billionaire CEO and majority owner of Virelli Global. The very company she was bragging about every day. The very company she thought she was climbing in. The very company she believed would one day crown her. Darius Hart owned it. He built it. He controlled it. And he was pretending to be a janitor inside his own empire for one reason. To see who people really were when they thought power was not watching. He never expected the person who would fail the test the hardest would be the woman sleeping beside him. The lobby was enormous, shining, rich, with chandeliers hanging like frozen fire above their heads, and a crowd had formed in a wide circle. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Some were whispering. Some were recording. Some were smiling nervously like they did not want Brielle to turn her wrath on them. And near the back, a tall man in a black suit stood with his arms behind his back, face unreadable. That man was Victor Lang, head of corporate security. He was Darius's most trusted executive. The only person in the building who knew the truth. The only person who knew that the janitor on his knees was the king of the entire company. Victor's eyes stayed fixed on Darius like he was waiting for a signal. A single nod. A single word. A single moment that would end the performance and start the consequences. Brielle tilted her head and laughed louder. She said, "Look at you, you can barely even mop properly, you are embarrassing me in front of my colleagues." Darius kept his head lowered. His voice came out calm. He said, "I am sorry ma'am, I will clean it up." The crowd reacted to the way he said ma'am, because it sounded like something deeper than acting. It sounded like a man swallowing his pride. Brielle stepped closer. She said ma'am. She laughed again. She said, "You hear that, everyone, my janitor cannot even talk right." One of the interns whispered, "That is too much." Another woman in HR looked away, ashamed. A senior manager murmured under his breath that Brielle was out of control. But nobody stepped in. Because Brielle Hart was known for ending careers with one email. She was known for destroying people in meetings. She was known for making grown men apologize in front of entire departments. She was known for being untouchable. Or at least she thought she was. Brielle nudged the bucket with her foot, sending it clanging across the marble. Then she pointed down at Darius. She said, "Pick it up." Darius reached for it slowly. And as he did, Brielle lifted her heel and pressed it down on his back again, not hard enough to injure him, but hard enough to humiliate him. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Darius's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the metal bucket. And for a moment, Victor Lang shifted his stance. Because he could feel it. The edge. The moment Darius might stop acting. Brielle leaned forward. She said, you know what, I am sick of seeing you in my building, you are always here, always in the way, always looking like a stray, do you even have pride? Darius whispered. He said yes. Brielle laughed. She said, where is your pride, on the floor with the soap water? A man in a suit near the crowd tried to speak up. He said, Brielle, maybe that is enough. Brielle snapped her head toward him. She said, did I ask you? The man shut up instantly. The crowd went silent again. Brielle turned back to Darius. She said, you know what the problem is, you think because you are my husband you can come in here and act like you belong. Darius lifted his eyes slightly, just enough to look at her shoes. He said, I do not want to embarrass you. Brielle scoffed. She said, you are embarrassing me by existing. That sentence hit the crowd like a slap. Because now it was not about a spill. It was not about a mop. It was not about professionalism. It was pure contempt. Brielle turned to the crowd and spread her hands like she was performing. She said, you all know I work at the highest level of this company, I sit in meetings with people who make decisions worth billions, and then I go home and I have to look at this. She pointed down at Darius like he was a stain. She said, I married down, and I am paying for it. A few people in the crowd looked away, disgusted. A few looked shocked. Some looked excited like they were watching drama. And one person near the back, a young assistant named Nia, looked like she wanted to cry. Because Nia had seen Darius around. He was quiet. He was polite. He always held doors. He always said good morning. He always smiled softly. He never looked like a man with hate in him. And now he was being crushed publicly. Darius's voice stayed low. He said, Brielle, please. Brielle's eyes narrowed. She said, please what? Darius said, please do not do this here. Brielle laughed. She said, here, this is my world, and you are lucky I let you breathe in it. Then Brielle did something that made the entire lobby freeze. She took off her sunglasses slowly, like she wanted everyone to see her eyes as she delivered the final humiliation. She looked down at Darius. And she said, kiss my shoe. The crowd gasped so loud it sounded like a wave. Someone whispered no. Someone else whispered she is insane. Victor Lang's eyes hardened. His jaw clenched. Because he knew this was crossing a line Darius did not need to tolerate. Darius stayed still for a moment. Then he slowly placed the bucket upright. He wiped his gloved hands on the apron. He lifted his head. And he looked at Brielle fully. His eyes were calm. Not broken. Not angry. Just calm. And that calmness made Brielle hesitate for half a second. Because she saw something in his gaze that she had not seen in a long time. Not fear. Not apology. Authority. Brielle recovered quickly and sneered. She said, you heard me, kiss my shoe, let everyone see what you really are. Darius breathed in slowly. He said, Brielle, stop. Brielle laughed. She said, stop, you giving me orders now. Darius looked around the lobby slowly, at the crowd, at the marble, at the chandeliers, at the people watching, at the security, at Victor Lang standing in the back like a statue. Then he looked back at Brielle. And he said one sentence that sounded harmless to everyone else. But sounded like the end of the world to Victor Lang. He said, Victor. Victor stepped forward immediately. The crowd turned in confusion. Brielle blinked. She said, Victor, why are you moving? Victor walked straight toward Darius with a level of respect nobody had ever seen him show anyone in public. And then Victor stopped beside Darius. And spoke in a clear professional voice that echoed through the lobby. He said, yes sir. The entire room froze. Because nobody called Darius sir. Nobody. Brielle's face tightened. She laughed nervously. She said, sir, what are you talking about, Victor, what is this? Victor did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Darius. Darius stood up slowly, rising from his knees like a man standing up from a lie. The green scrubs and apron still hung on him. The yellow gloves still covered his hands. But the way he stood changed everything. He looked taller. He looked heavier. He looked like a man who had been carrying the weight of silence. Darius looked at Victor. He said, "Bring them." Victor nodded. He tapped his earpiece. He said, "Bring the board down now." Brielle's smile faded. She said, "The board." Someone in the crowd whispered, "The board is in the building." Another whispered, "Why would the board come to the lobby?" A senior executive near the front began to sweat. Because he recognized Victor's tone. That tone meant emergency. That tone meant power was moving. Brielle turned toward Darius, her voice suddenly sharp. She said, "What is this? What are you doing? You trying to embarrass me now?" Darius looked at her calmly. He said no. He paused. Then he said, "You embarrassed yourself." Brielle scoffed. She said, "You are a janitor." Darius nodded slowly. He said, "Today I am." Brielle laughed nervously again. She said, "Today." Darius said, "Yes, today I am a janitor, and today you are going to learn who owns this building." The lobby fell into a dead silence. Because even the people who hated Brielle could not understand what they were hearing. And the people who liked Brielle were suddenly terrified. Because something about Darius's calmness felt like a storm standing still. The elevator doors across the lobby opened. And out walked 6 men and women in suits. Older. Powerful. Expensive. Their presence alone made the crowd step back automatically. The board of directors of Virelli Global. Walking into the lobby like they were attending a funeral. And behind them came 2 more people. A woman with a tablet and a legal folder. And a man in a suit carrying a garment bag. Brielle's face went pale. Because she recognized one of the board members instantly. Mr. Raymond Alston. The chairman. The man she had begged for mentorship. The man she had been trying to impress for years. Raymond Alston looked at the scene in the lobby. The spilled water. The bucket. The janitor in scrubs. The crowd. Brielle standing in heels. And his face hardened. He walked straight toward Darius. And without hesitation, he spoke in a loud, clear voice. He said, "Mr. Hart." The crowd froze again. Because they knew that name. Hart. Darius Hart. The legendary founder of Virelli. The man whose photo hung in the executive hallway. The man who rarely appeared in public. The man rumored to be living overseas. The man whose net worth was whispered about like a myth. Raymond Alston stood in front of the janitor. And bowed his head slightly. He said, "Welcome back, sir." The entire lobby erupted into shocked whispers and gasps. Hands flew to mouths. Phones lifted higher. People stumbled backward. Someone whispered, "That is him." Someone else whispered, "That is impossible." Brielle's knees shook. Her face drained of color so fast it looked like her blood left her body. She stared at Darius like she was looking at a ghost. Her lips trembled. She whispered, "Darius." Darius looked at her calmly. He said, "Hello, Brielle." And in that moment, the humiliation she poured on him in front of everyone turned around like a blade. Because now the whole company was watching. Not a janitor being humiliated. But a CEO being disrespected by his own wife. And the story of what happened in this lobby was about to spread through every floor, every office, every boardroom, every investor meeting. Because this was not a personal moment anymore. This was corporate history. And part 2 was about to begin. With Brielle Hart realizing she had just destroyed herself in the worst possible way. By humiliating the one man in the world who could end her career with a single sentence. And Darius Hart was finally done staying quiet. Brielle's lips stayed parted like her mouth had forgotten how to close, and the lobby around her turned into a frozen painting of shock, because nobody knew what to do when a woman's cruelty suddenly met the truth. Darius Hart stood there in green scrubs and a stained apron, yellow gloves still on his hands, and yet the way every executive in that building looked at him now made it clear. The clothes were meaningless. The power was real. Raymond Alston, the chairman, kept his eyes on Darius like he was staring at a man who could move the economy, and the other board members stood behind him with tight faces, not because they were angry at Darius, but because they were furious at what had been done to him. Victor Lang remained at Darius's side, still and watchful, while the crowd of employees looked like they had just witnessed a murder. Because in a way, they had. Brielle's career was dying in real time. Brielle finally found her voice, but it came out thin and shaking. She said, "This is not funny." Nobody laughed. Not one person. The silence around her was so heavy it felt like a physical object pressing against her chest. Brielle looked at Darius again, and her eyes were wide, frantic, searching for any sign that this was a prank, a setup, a misunderstanding, anything that could save her. She whispered, "Darius." Her voice cracked. She said, "Why?" Darius did not answer immediately. He simply looked at her for a long moment, and his gaze was not cruel, not vengeful, not loud. It was disappointed. And disappointment is the kind of pain that does not heal with apologies. Raymond Alston spoke before Darius did, and his voice echoed through the lobby. He said, "Everyone step back and clear the area." Victor Lang raised his hand and security moved immediately, guiding employees away gently but firmly. Phones were lowered by some, but not all. Some people were still recording, because they knew they were capturing a moment that would be talked about for decades. The board members moved closer, creating a tight circle around Darius, Brielle, Victor, and Simone Price, the corporate counsel who had arrived with the board. Simone was a sharp black woman with glasses and a face like law itself, and she stared at Brielle like she was already drafting the consequences in her mind. Brielle looked around, breathing fast. She said, "I did not know." Her voice rose. She said, "I swear I did not know." Darius finally spoke, calm and clear. He said, "That is the problem." Brielle blinked. Darius said, "You did not know, and you still treated me like that." Brielle's eyes filled with tears immediately. She said, "I was angry." Darius nodded slowly. He said, "I know." Brielle said, "I felt embarrassed." Darius said, "I know." Brielle said, "I felt like you were holding me back." Darius's jaw tightened slightly. He said, "I know." Then Darius took one slow step closer to her, and his voice dropped lower. He said, "But Brielle, you did not humiliate me because you were angry." He paused. He said, "You humiliated me because you thought I was powerless." That sentence hit Brielle so hard her knees almost buckled. She whispered no. Darius said yes. He looked around at the lobby. He said, "You did it because you wanted everyone to see you on top and me beneath you, and you wanted them to laugh with you, and you wanted to feel bigger." Brielle's tears spilled. She said, "I am sorry." Darius nodded slowly. He said, "I know you are sorry now." Brielle's voice cracked. She said, "Please, please, I did not mean it." Darius looked at her calmly. He said, "You meant every word when you said it." Brielle sobbed. She said, "I was under pressure." Darius said, "So was I." Brielle looked confused. Darius said, "I was under pressure watching my wife become someone I did not recognize, and I was under pressure watching the people in my company treat workers like they were invisible, and I was under pressure because I needed to know who was real." Brielle whispered, "Why did you do this? Why were you pretending to be a janitor?" Darius took a slow breath. He said, "Because I built this company from nothing, and I promised myself I would never become the kind of man who forgets what the bottom feels like." He looked at the board. He said, "And because I suspected there was rot in my culture." Raymond Alston nodded slowly. He said, "We have been receiving complaints, sir." Darius nodded. He said, "I know." Then Darius looked back at Brielle. He said, "And I wanted to see the rot with my own eyes." Brielle's tears slowed, and her face twisted with fear. She said you were testing people. Darius nodded. He said yes. Brielle whispered you were testing me. Darius stared at her. He said no. He paused. Then he said I was trusting you. That sentence broke her. Because it meant the truth was worse than a test. It meant he was not trying to trap her. He was trying to love her. And she ruined it. Brielle fell to her knees suddenly in the lobby, not for drama, but because her body could not hold her anymore. She grabbed Darius's pant leg like a drowning person grabbing a rope. She said, Darius, please, please do not do this, please do not destroy me. Darius looked down at her, and for a moment the crowd behind the security line gasped again, because the powerful woman who had just pressed her heel into a janitor's back was now begging at that same man's feet. The irony was so sharp it hurt. Darius did not move. He did not pull away. He simply looked down at her and spoke quietly. He said, stand up. Brielle shook her head, crying. Darius's voice became firmer. He said, Brielle, stand up. Brielle slowly rose, trembling. Her navy dress looked suddenly plain. Her heels looked suddenly foolish. Her sunglasses were gone. And without her armor, she looked like what she really was. A woman terrified of consequences. Darius turned to Victor Lang. He said, Victor, take her badge. Victor stepped forward calmly. Brielle froze. She whispered no. Victor reached out his hand. He said, ma'am, your badge. Brielle's eyes widened. She said, Darius, please, do not do this, I work for this. Darius nodded. He said you did. He paused. Then he said, and you used it to hurt people. Brielle shook her head violently. She said, I can change. Darius said, I hope you do. He nodded toward Victor again. Victor took Brielle's badge gently but firmly. Then Simone Price, the corporate counsel, spoke for the first time, her voice cold. She said, Ms. Hart, you are suspended pending investigation for workplace harassment, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming of an executive. Brielle's breath caught. She said, suspended. Simone nodded. She said, you will also be required to surrender all company devices immediately. Brielle turned toward Darius, eyes desperate. She said, you are my husband. Darius's voice stayed calm. He said yes. Brielle whispered, then protect me. Darius stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, I protected you for years. He paused. He said, and you protected your image instead of protecting your marriage. Brielle's shoulders shook. She said, I did not know you were him. Darius said, I did not know you were this. The board members exchanged glances. Raymond Alston looked at Darius carefully. He said, Sir, would you like us to move this to a private conference room? Darius nodded. He said yes. Then Darius looked at the crowd behind security. He raised his voice slightly, calm but loud enough to carry. He said, everyone, return to your floors. The crowd hesitated. Darius said, now. They moved quickly, like children caught in the presence of a strict father. Because now they understood the janitor was the CEO. And the CEO had been watching. Victor and security guided Brielle gently toward a side corridor, and Simone Price walked beside them, while Darius and the board moved toward a private elevator. As the doors closed, Brielle looked at Darius one last time, tears streaming, and she whispered. She said, please. Darius did not respond. Not because he hated her. But because the truth was he could not trust his own voice around her yet. The elevator rose in silence, and when they arrived at the executive floor, the board led Darius into the main conference room. It was the room where billion-dollar decisions were made. The room where Brielle had always dreamed of sitting as a future VP. And now she would not even be allowed to step inside. Darius sat at the head of the table. Raymond Alston sat beside him. The other board members took their seats quietly. Simone Price stood near the screen with her tablet ready. Victor Lang stood near the door. Darius looked around the room. Then he spoke, calm and sharp. He said, I want a full report on every harassment complaint, every wrongful termination, every discrimination claim, every case of executive abuse that has been buried under HR silence. Simone nodded. She said, we have already started compiling data, sir. Darius said, I want names. He paused. He said, and I want them removed. Raymond Alston nodded slowly. He said, understood. Darius leaned back. He said, this company is worth $100 billion, but it will be worth nothing if the culture is rotten, and today I saw the rot with my own eyes. A board member named Dr. Yvette Collins spoke softly. She said, sir, your wife. Darius's jaw tightened. He said, my wife will not be treated as an exception. He paused. Then he said, if anything, she will be treated as the example. The room went silent. Because they understood what that meant. The CEO was not going to protect his own spouse from consequences. He was going to make her the symbol of change. Victor Lang's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then spoke quietly. He said, sir, social media is already spreading footage from the lobby. Darius nodded slowly. He said, good. Raymond Alston blinked. He said, good. Darius said, yes, good, because secrecy protects abusers, and sunlight kills rot. Simone Price said, the media will ask questions. Darius said, let them. He paused. Then he said, schedule a company-wide address in 1 hour. The board members nodded. Because they knew what was coming. Darius Hart was about to reveal himself to the entire company officially. He was about to speak as CEO. Not as a myth. Not as a rumor. But as a man who had been on his knees scrubbing floors. And in that address, he was going to do 2 things. He was going to rebuild the company culture. And he was going to decide what to do with Brielle. Because the truth was, humiliating him in the lobby was only the surface. Darius had been pretending to be a janitor for weeks. And he had seen things. He had heard things. He had watched Brielle in meetings. He had watched her treat assistants. He had watched her step on people to climb. He had watched her become addicted to power. And now the next thing would be where the whole company learned the truth. And Brielle Hart realized that the humiliation she poured on her janitor husband was going to cost her more than her job. It was going to cost her identity. Because the CEO was done hiding. And the world was about to watch what happens when a billionaire decides to hold everyone accountable. Even the woman he once loved. The executive floor felt colder than the lobby, not because of air conditioning, but because truth has a way of draining warmth out of people when they realize they have been living inside a lie. Darius Hart sat at the head of the long glass table while the board members watched him carefully, because they were not just looking at their CEO. They were looking at a man who had just been publicly humiliated by his own wife in front of hundreds of employees, and yet he still looked calm enough to run the world. Simone Price stood beside the screen with her tablet ready, Victor Lang stood near the door like a guard dog that never slept, and Raymond Alston leaned forward with his hands clasped like a man preparing to witness a historic decision. Darius spoke quietly. He said, I want the address written in my voice, not corporate language, I want them to feel what I felt on that floor. Simone nodded. She said, understood. Darius said, and I want the lobby footage preserved, every angle, every recording, every security camera feed, because nobody is going to rewrite what happened. Victor nodded immediately. He said, already secured, sir. Raymond Alston cleared his throat. He said, Darius, before the address, we need to discuss the legal side of this, because your wife is a senior executive, and the public humiliation in the lobby will become a national story by noon. Darius nodded. He said, let it. Raymond hesitated. He said, I respect that, but there is risk, investors may panic if they think the company is unstable. Darius leaned back slightly. He said, the company is unstable if we protect abusers, not if we expose them. A board member named Franklin Moore, a black man with silver hair and a reputation for being cautious, spoke carefully. He said, "Sir, what you did is bold, but it could also be interpreted as a personal revenge act." Darius turned his eyes toward Franklin. His voice stayed calm. He said, "If this was revenge, I would have destroyed her quietly, in private, and I would have let the world believe she resigned for family reasons." He paused. He said, "What I am doing is correction." The room went silent, because that word carried a weight only builders understand. Correction. Not punishment. Not chaos. A reset. Simone Price tapped her tablet and the screen lit up with a list of internal reports. Simone said, "While you were undercover, we documented multiple incidents, some small, some severe, and the pattern is clear." She scrolled. She said executive assistants being verbally degraded, janitorial staff being treated like furniture, interns being forced into unpaid overtime, managers using fear as motivation, and several reports specifically involving Brielle Hart. Raymond Alston's face tightened. He said, "How many?" Simone answered without hesitation. She said 14 formal complaints in the last 18 months, and at least 30 informal reports that were never filed because employees feared retaliation. Victor Lang added quietly. He said, "And those numbers are only what we could trace, sir, the culture has trained people to stay silent." Darius nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then he said something that made the board members shift in their seats. He said, "I want every executive in this building to understand one thing: if you use power to humiliate someone, you are not powerful, you are weak, and I will remove you." Raymond Alston nodded firmly. He said, "Agreed." Franklin Moore hesitated. He said, "Darius, that is a massive shakeup, you will lose people." Darius nodded. He said, "Good, because I would rather lose 100 toxic leaders than lose one good employee who is tired of being treated like nothing." Simone Price looked at Darius carefully. She said, "Sir, what about Brielle? Do you want to handle this through HR or directly through board authority?" Darius leaned forward slightly. He said, "I want her case handled like any other executive case, but I also want something extra." Raymond asked. He said, "What?" Darius said, "I want the company to see the outcome publicly inside the company, not as gossip, not as whispers, but as policy." Franklin Moore frowned. He said, "You want to make an example?" Darius nodded. He said, "Yes, because secrecy is how abuse survives." Raymond Alston sighed slowly. He said, "The press will demand comment." Darius said, "The press can wait." He paused. He said, "First I speak to my employees." Simone nodded. She said, "The address is scheduled in 40 minutes, the live stream will go to all offices globally." Darius stood up slowly. He removed his yellow gloves. He removed the apron. He folded them neatly and placed them on the table. The board members watched him like they were watching a ritual. Because it was. The ritual of a man removing a disguise. Darius looked at Victor. He said, "Bring the suit." Victor nodded and stepped out, returning a moment later with the garment bag. Inside was a tailored black suit with a white shirt and a dark tie. Darius changed in the private executive lounge beside the conference room, and when he stepped back out, he looked like a different person. Not because he was pretending now, but because he was returning to who he really was. The janitor was gone. The CEO was back. Darius walked toward the executive auditorium where the address would be delivered, and the halls were lined with employees who had heard the news spreading like wildfire. Some stared. Some whispered. Some looked ashamed. Some looked terrified. Some looked relieved. Because people who have been suffering under toxic leadership always pray for one thing. For someone powerful to finally care. When Darius entered the auditorium, cameras were already set up, lights were on, and the company logo glowed behind the stage. Virelli Global. The symbol of $100 billion. Darius stood behind the podium. Raymond Alston and the board sat behind him in a row like witnesses. Victor Lang stood off to the side. Simone Price stood near the front with her tablet. The room was full of senior executives and department heads, and thousands more were watching on screens across the world. Darius looked into the camera. He took a slow breath. Then he began. He said, "Good morning, Birelli." The sound of his voice alone made the room freeze. Because it was not a recorded video. Not a corporate message. It was live. Real. He continued. He said, "For the last 3 weeks, I have been working inside this company under a false identity, wearing a janitorial uniform, cleaning floors, emptying trash, and listening." A murmur spread through the room. Darius said, "I did it because I built Birelli from nothing, and I promised myself I would never become the kind of leader who forgets what it feels like to be unseen." He paused. He said, "I also did it because I suspected something was wrong in our culture." He leaned closer to the microphone. He said, "And I was right." The room went silent. Darius said, "I saw executives treat assistants like punching bags, I saw managers use fear as motivation, I saw people speak to janitors like they were invisible, I saw arrogance, entitlement, and cruelty." He paused again. He said, "And I saw it from someone I trusted the most." A wave of tension moved through the auditorium. Because they all knew what he meant. Darius continued. He said, "Many of you witnessed what happened in the lobby today." He did not say her name yet. He did not need to. Darius said, "I was humiliated publicly, not by a stranger, not by a competitor, not by an enemy." He paused. He said, "But by my wife, Brielle Hart, Senior Director of Operations." The room reacted with a collective inhale. Some executives looked down. Some looked shocked. Some looked like they wanted to disappear. Darius's voice stayed calm. He said, "Brielle is currently suspended pending investigation, and her case will be handled under the same standards as anyone else, no exceptions." He paused. He said, "If you think being married to me makes someone untouchable, understand this." He leaned forward slightly. He said, "It makes them accountable." That sentence hit like thunder. Because it was the opposite of what people expected. A CEO protecting his spouse is common. A CEO exposing his spouse is rare. Darius continued. He said, "Today is not about humiliation, it is about correction." He said, "Birelli is worth $100 billion, but its true value is its people, and if our people are suffering, then our value is a lie." He paused. He said, "Effective immediately, we are launching a culture reset." He began listing changes, each one landing like a brick. Independent reporting channels. Mandatory leadership training. Executive behavior audits. Immediate termination for harassment. Pay raises for janitorial and service staff. A public recognition program for invisible labor. A full review of HR retaliation cases. And a promise that every employee would be treated like a human being. As Darius spoke, some people in the auditorium looked inspired. Some looked terrified. Because they knew their behavior had been exposed. Darius finished with a final statement. He said, "If you are a leader in this company, understand something, power is not your title, power is your responsibility, and if you use it to crush people, I will crush your career." Then he stepped back from the podium. The auditorium erupted into a strange mix of applause and stunned silence. Because nobody had ever heard a CEO speak like that. Not scripted. Not polished. Not distant. Human. After the address, Darius walked off stage and into a private corridor. Victor Lang followed close behind. Simone Price joined them. Raymond Alston walked beside Darius quietly. Raymond said, "You just shook the entire company." Darius nodded. He said, "Good." Simone said, "The media is already calling, and there is another issue." Darius turned his head. He said, "What issue?" Simone hesitated. She said, "Brielle is not in her office." Victor's eyes narrowed. He said, "What do you mean?" Simone said she left the building 10 minutes ago with her assistant, and she took her phone. she did not surrender devices. Darius's jaw tightened slightly. He said she is running. Victor said I can have her stopped. Darius shook his head slowly. He said no. He paused. Then he said let her run. Simone looked confused. Darius said if she runs, she reveals her guilt, and if she reveals her guilt, she gives us everything we need. Victor nodded slowly. Raymond looked at Darius carefully. He said Darius, what exactly do you think she is going to do? Darius stared down the corridor, eyes calm but cold. He said she is going to try to destroy me before I destroy her. And as he said it, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. And saw a notification that made his blood run colder than any humiliation in the lobby. A message from Brielle. One sentence. If you ruin me, I will ruin you too. Darius stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he whispered quietly. He said so this is who you are now. Victor leaned in. He said sir. Darius looked up. He said get everything ready. Victor said for what? Darius said for war. Because Brielle Hart was not going to go down quietly. And Darius Hart was about to learn that the woman he married did not just humiliate him. She was willing to burn the entire empire to save her pride. Darius did not reply to the message immediately, because he had learned long ago that the fastest way to lose control in any war is to react emotionally, and the truth was the pain he felt was not just anger. It was betrayal. Because humiliation from strangers is one thing, but humiliation from the person you trusted enough to call wife is a wound that keeps bleeding even when you try to cover it with power. Victor Lang walked beside him down the corridor, his expression tight, and Simone Price followed with her tablet held like a shield, while Raymond Alston stayed slightly behind, watching Darius carefully like he was studying the emotional temperature of a man holding $100 billion in his hands. They entered Darius's private office, the one that had been untouched for months while the company believed he was away, and the moment Darius stepped inside, the room felt like a throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view of the skyline. A heavy desk made from dark wood. A wall with framed photos of Varelli's early days. Darius as a young man in a tiny rented office. Darius standing with his first team of 5 employees. Darius holding the first product prototype. And in the center of it all, a large portrait of his mother, smiling softly. Darius looked at that portrait for a moment, and his eyes hardened. Because his mother had raised him with one rule. Never let power make you cruel, and never let love make you weak. Darius turned toward Victor. He said I want eyes on Brielle, not to harm her, not to trap her physically, just eyes, I want to know where she goes and who she speaks to. Victor nodded. He said already in motion, sir. Simone stepped forward. She said Darius, we need to discuss exposure risk, because Brielle has access to internal systems, contracts, confidential board communications, and if she is panicking, she might leak something. Raymond Alston nodded slowly. He said she could do damage. Darius leaned back against the desk, arms folded. He said she will try. Simone asked carefully. She said do you think she has something real, or do you think she will invent something? Darius's eyes narrowed. He said both, because when a person is cornered, they use truth and lies like weapons without caring which is which. Victor added. He said she also has personal leverage, sir, she knows your private life, your identity structure, your holdings, your hidden ownership networks. Darius nodded. He said and she knows nothing that can destroy me legally, but she knows enough to embarrass me publicly. Raymond Alston sighed. He said public embarrassment can shake investors. Darius looked at Raymond. He said investors will survive embarrassment, they will not survive a company that protects toxic leadership. Simone tapped her tablet. She said there is another issue, the lobby footage is now trending online, and people are split, some are praising you for exposing corporate abuse, but some are accusing you of setting your wife up. Darius's jaw tightened slightly. He said of course they are. Simone said she is already spinning it, her assistant posted a statement saying she was emotionally manipulated, that you staged the situation to humiliate her. Darius let out a slow breath. He said she is fast. Victor's phone buzzed, and he checked it. His eyes lifted. He said, "Sir, she went to the Westbrook Hotel." Simone blinked. She said, "Why would she go there?" Darius's eyes narrowed. He said, "Because that is where journalists stay when they want privacy and access." Raymond Alston's face tightened. He said, "She is going to the press." Darius nodded slowly. He said, "Yes." Simone stepped closer. She said, "We can stop her legally, we can issue injunctions, we can threaten defamation action." Darius shook his head. He said no. Simone frowned. She said no. Darius said no, because if we try to silence her, it feeds her narrative, it makes her look like the victim, and it makes me look like the billionaire husband crushing his wife. Raymond nodded slowly. He said, "That is true." Darius said, "Let her speak." He paused. Then he said, "But we will speak first." Simone said, "How?" Darius looked at Victor. He said, "Bring the executive team to the war room." Victor nodded and left immediately. Darius turned to Simone. He said, "Draft a statement that is short, calm, and factual, no emotion, no personal attacks, and make it clear she is under investigation and that the company is cooperating fully." Simone nodded. She said, "Done." Darius looked at Raymond. He said, "And I want you with me when we address the media, because I want the world to see this is not personal revenge, this is corporate accountability." Raymond nodded. He said, "I will stand with you." Within 30 minutes, the Virelli war room filled with high-level executives, legal counsel, PR strategists, and security, and the energy was tense, because everyone understood what was happening. A billionaire CEO had returned. He had exposed internal rot. He had suspended his own wife publicly. And now that wife was running to the press with a threat in her mouth. The head of PR, a black woman named Alana Pierce, stood at the screen with social media data and press inquiries flooding in. Alana said the narrative is splitting into two camps, one camp sees you as a hero, the other sees you as a manipulator. Darius nodded. He said that is expected. Alana said the question everyone is asking is why you married her and hid your identity. Darius said I will answer. Alana blinked. She said you will. Darius nodded. He said yes, because hiding my identity is not a crime, and love is not a corporate requirement, and I will not allow the public to shame me for wanting to be treated like a human being. Simone Price said we need to be careful, because the more personal you get, the more she can twist. Darius nodded. He said I will not get personal, I will get honest. Victor returned with a list of executives arriving. Darius stood up. He said listen to me carefully, every single person in this room is here because you have influence, and influence is responsibility, and I am not going to allow anyone to protect Brielle because she is married to me. He paused. He said if any of you try, you are gone. The room went silent. Alana Pierce nodded. She said understood. Darius said now, here is what we do. He walked to the screen. He pointed at the footage from the lobby. He said we do not deny it. He said we do not hide it. He said we do not spin it. He said we own it, we acknowledge it, and we show what we are doing about it. Simone said that is strong. Darius said it is necessary. Raymond Alston looked at Darius. He said in your marriage. Darius's jaw tightened. He said my marriage is not the company's business. He paused. Then he said but her abuse is. The executives nodded slowly. Because that line separated personal from professional in a way that protected the company and held Brielle accountable. Then Victor's phone buzzed again. He listened for a moment, then his face tightened. He said sir, Brielle is in a meeting room at the Westbrook Hotel, and she is not alone. Darius looked up. He said who is with her? Victor hesitated. Then he said a reporter, and also a man from our company. Simone's eyes narrowed. She said who? Victor said Jamal Red. The room went silent instantly. Because Jamal Red was not just anyone. He was the chief financial officer of Virelli Global. The man who had access to every account. Every offshore structure. Every investor relationship. Every confidential deal. Raymond Alston's face went pale. He said, why would Jamal be with her? Darius stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he said quietly. He said because Brielle is not just running to the press. He paused. Then he said she is building an alliance. Simone stepped forward. She said, Darius, if the CFO is with her, this is bigger than a marital crisis, this is a corporate threat. Darius nodded slowly. He said yes. Alana Pierce whispered. She said this could become a hostile narrative, claims of fraud, claims of deception, claims of governance failure. Raymond Alston leaned forward. He said, Darius, if Jamal is involved, we need to move fast. Darius's eyes stayed calm, but something colder entered them. He said, I have been moving fast. He paused. Then he said, now we move sharp. He turned toward Victor. He said, freeze Jamal's access. Victor nodded. He said immediately. Darius turned to Simone. He said, prepare emergency board authority to suspend the CFO pending investigation. Simone nodded. She said, done. Darius turned to Alana. He said, schedule the press statement in 30 minutes, we speak before Brielle does. Alana nodded. She said, yes sir. Darius looked around the room. He said, I did not build a $100 billion company to have it held hostage by anyone's ego, not even my wife's. The war room moved like a machine after that, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, legal documents being drafted, security teams mobilizing, because Virelli Global was about to face its most dangerous threat. Not from competitors. Not from markets. But from betrayal inside its own walls. And as Darius walked toward the press stage, his phone buzzed again. This time it was not a threat. It was a video link. Sent from an unknown number. Darius clicked it. And his stomach tightened. Because the video showed Brielle sitting in a hotel meeting room, eyes red, makeup perfect again, posture composed, and beside her sat Jamal Red, the CFO. Brielle looked directly into the camera and spoke with calm calculated sadness. She said, my husband has been deceiving this company and deceiving me for months, and I am here to tell the truth before he destroys my name. Darius stared at the screen. His jaw clenched. Victor leaned in. He said, sir. Darius whispered quietly. He said she is going to burn everything. Raymond Alston stepped closer. He said, then we stop her. Darius looked up slowly. And his voice came out like steel. He said no. He paused. Then he said, we let her light the match. Because I want the whole world to see who she really is when she thinks she is losing. And as Darius stepped toward the cameras, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Brielle Hart was not just a toxic executive. She was a dangerous woman. And by the end of this day, she would either be humbled. Or she would be destroyed by her own lies. The press stage in the Virelli lobby looked the same as it always did, polished marble, the company logo glowing behind the podium, security standing in clean lines, cameras pointed forward, reporters gathered like vultures who smelled blood. But today the air felt different. Today the building was not just hosting a press moment. It was hosting a reckoning. Darius Hart walked into view with Raymond Alston beside him and Simone Price slightly behind, and the reporters immediately started shouting questions so fast their voices blended together. Mr. Hart, is it true you were disguised as a janitor? Mr. Hart, did you set your wife up? Mr. Hart, is the company in crisis? Mr. Hart, is your CFO involved? Mr. Hart, is there corruption inside Virelli? Darius stepped to the podium and lifted one hand slightly. The room quieted like a crowd in church when the pastor raises his palm. Darius's voice came out calm and deep. He said good afternoon. He paused, letting the cameras settle. He said my name is Darius Hart, and I am the founder, majority owner, and CEO of Virelli Global. The reporters leaned in. Darius continued. He said today, many of you saw footage of an incident in our lobby involving a janitorial worker and a senior executive. He paused. He said that janitorial worker was me. A wave of murmurs rolled through the press like thunder. Darius said I will not apologize for going undercover inside my own company. He paused. He said because leadership is not supposed to be distant, and accountability is not supposed to be theoretical. Raymond Alston nodded beside him. Darius said I did it because I suspected our culture was drifting away from dignity, and because I wanted to see it for myself. He paused again. He said I saw what I feared. He did not mention Brielle's name yet. He let the silence carry it. Darius said we have already launched a full internal audit of executive conduct, and we are cooperating with independent investigators to ensure no complaint is buried and no abuse is protected. Simone Price stood steady behind him, her presence making the message feel legal and real. A reporter shouted. What about your wife? Darius's eyes remained calm. He said Brielle Hart has been suspended pending investigation for workplace harassment and abuse of authority. He paused. He said she will be treated like any other executive. A reporter shouted. Is it true she is claiming you manipulated her? Darius nodded slowly. He said she is free to make any claims she chooses. He paused. He said but facts will not change based on feelings. The room quieted again. Darius said there is something else I want to address directly, because rumors are already spreading. He looked into the camera. He said our CFO, Jamal Red, has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Reporters erupted again. Raymond Alston stepped forward slightly. He said the board has taken emergency action to secure company financial systems and ensure investor stability. Darius nodded. He said Virelli Global is stable. He paused. He said and it will remain stable because I will remove anyone who treats this company like a personal playground. A reporter shouted. Are you saying your wife and CFO were working together? Darius's eyes narrowed slightly. He said I am saying we will investigate, and we will reveal the truth. Then Darius leaned slightly closer to the microphone. And his voice dropped just enough to make everyone listen harder. He said I also want to speak to every employee watching right now. He paused. He said if you have ever been humiliated in this company, if you have ever been treated like you were invisible, if you have ever been afraid to report abuse because you feared retaliation, understand this clearly. He looked straight into the lens. He said the person who built this company was on his knees scrubbing floors, and I heard you, and I saw you, and I will protect you. The lobby press area went silent. Because that line landed like a promise. Then Darius stepped back. He said no further questions. And he walked away while reporters shouted after him. As soon as he entered the private corridor, Victor Lang was there waiting, his face tight. Victor said sir, she is going live in 10 minutes. Darius nodded. He said let her. Simone Price looked at him sharply. She said Darius, are you sure? Darius said yes, because once she goes live, she cannot rewrite what she says later. Raymond Alston exhaled slowly. He said this is going to get ugly. Darius looked at him. He said it already is. They moved into the war room again, where screens were already set up showing social media feeds, news outlets, and a waiting live stream link. Alana Pierce stood with her team, hands moving fast over keyboards. Alana said she is using the Westbrook Hotel press suite, she has a reporter from the business network, and Jamal is beside her. Simone Price's eyes narrowed. She said Jamal is actually sitting beside her. Victor nodded. He said yes ma'am. Darius stared at the screen. And for a moment, he felt something colder than anger. He felt grief. Because he realized Brielle was not panicking randomly. She was executing a plan. And that meant she had been capable of this kind of betrayal for a long time. The live stream began. Brielle appeared on the screen in a crisp blouse, hair flawless, eyes slightly red like she had been crying, and she looked like the perfect image of a woman wronged. Beside her sat Jamal Red in a dark suit, face calm, hands folded, looking like a man prepared to support her story. The reporter introduced her as Brielle Hart, Senior Director of Operations, and wife of CEO Darius Hart. Then the reporter asked the first question. Brielle took a breath and spoke in a voice that sounded fragile and strong at the same time. She said, "I never wanted this to be public, but my husband forced my hand." Darius watched without blinking. Brielle continued. She said, "Darius Hart has been lying to me, lying to this company, and manipulating people for months." She paused. She said he disguised himself as a janitor not to investigate culture, but to spy on executives and gather dirt so he could consolidate power and remove anyone who challenges him. Raymond Alston's jaw tightened. Simone Price whispered. She said she is framing it as governance abuse. Brielle continued. She said he also hid major financial activities from the board, and when I discovered it, he humiliated me publicly to silence me. Jamal Red finally spoke. He said, "I can confirm that there are irregularities in financial reporting that should concern investors." The war room went silent. Because Jamal had just crossed the line. He had made a public accusation. And now it was no longer a marital scandal. It was a corporate crisis. Alana Pierce whispered. She said, "If investors believe this, the stock will drop." Simone Price's eyes hardened. She said, "We need to respond immediately." Darius held up one hand. He said, "Wait." Brielle continued, voice growing more confident. She said, "He is not the hero people think he is a billionaire who enjoys control, and today he used my mistake to destroy me." She paused. She said, "And I am here to tell you the truth, because I will not be silenced." Darius stared at the screen. Then he nodded slowly. He said, "Okay." Victor leaned forward. He said, "Sir." Darius said, "She just gave us permission." Simone blinked. She said, "Permission for what?" Darius turned toward Alana. He said, "Pull up file package Delta." Alana's eyes widened. She said, "Delta." Victor's face tightened. Because he knew what that was. File package Delta was the evidence Darius had been collecting quietly for weeks. Not just about executive abuse. But about financial manipulation. About bribery. About internal theft. About a network of executives who had been siphoning money through vendors and fake consulting contracts. And the center of that network was Jamal Red. Darius had suspected it. That was part of why he went undercover. He had been waiting for proof. Now he had it. Simone Price stared at Darius. She said, "Darius, you have evidence on the CFO." Darius nodded. He said yes. Raymond Alston exhaled. He said, "Why did you not bring it sooner?" Darius looked at him. He said, "Because I needed it clean, undeniable, and I needed to know who else was involved." Victor added quietly. He said, "We tracked it through vendor payments and internal approvals, sir." Alana's team pulled the file package onto the main screen. Charts appeared. Bank transfers. Vendor names. Email chains. Digital signatures. Meeting notes. And one video clip. A security camera clip from a private executive lounge. Showing Brielle and Jamal together weeks earlier, sitting close, whispering, sliding papers across a table. Simone Price's eyes widened. She said they were planning this. Darius nodded. He said yes. Raymond Alston's face tightened. He said she was not just cruel, she was strategic. Darius said she wanted to become untouchable. He paused. Then he said she wanted to take my company from me. The war room went silent. Because that sentence sounded unbelievable. But the evidence on the screen made it real. Alana Pierce whispered. She said, "What do we do?" Darius leaned forward. He said, "We go live." Simone said, "You cannot." Darius said, "I can, and I will." Raymond Alston nodded slowly. He said, "If we do not respond, their narrative will spread." Simone Price took a breath. She said, "All right, but we do it legally, we do it carefully, we do it with facts only." Darius nodded. He said, "Facts only." Within minutes, Virelli Global's official channels went live. A split screen appeared. Brielle's live stream on one side. Darius in the war room on the other. The world watched in real time as the CEO responded. Darius looked into the camera. He said, "Brielle, Jamal, you just accused me of financial irregularities." He paused. He said, "So I am going to respond with evidence." Brielle's face froze on the screen. Jamal's eyes widened slightly. Darius continued. He said, "Jamal Red has been under investigation for weeks for vendor fraud, embezzlement, and unauthorized transfers totaling over $400 million. The reporter gasped. Brielle's mouth opened. Jamal leaned forward. He said, "That is a lie." Darius nodded slowly. He said, "It is not a lie." He signaled to Alana. The screen changed to the charts. The transfers. The emails. The signatures. Darius said, "We have the full documentation, and we have already delivered it to federal investigators." Jamal's face went pale. Brielle whispered no. Darius continued. He said, "Brielle Hart was not just a witness to this, she was a participant, she approved vendor contracts, she pressured staff to bypass compliance, and she used her position to intimidate anyone who questioned her." Brielle's eyes filled with panic. She said, "This is manipulation." Darius's voice stayed calm. He said, "No, Brielle, this is accountability." Then Darius played the security clip. The video showed Brielle and Jamal in the lounge. The world watched. The reporter's mouth fell open. Brielle's hand started shaking. Jamal stood up suddenly, trying to end the live stream, but security at the hotel moved in, because Victor Lang had already coordinated with authorities. The camera shook. Voices rose. And then the live stream cut abruptly. The war room stayed silent for a moment. Then Victor's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then looked at Darius. Victor said, "Sir, Jamal has been detained." Simone Price exhaled. Raymond Alston closed his eyes briefly like he was thanking God. Alana Pierce whispered. She said, "What about Brielle?" Victor listened again. Then he said, "Brielle tried to leave through the service exit, but hotel security stopped her, she is being held for questioning." Darius stared at the blank screen where her face had been. His jaw tightened. Not in victory. In grief. Because this was not a stranger. This was his wife. The woman he had once loved enough to marry while hiding his name. Now she was being escorted by authorities because she chose pride over love and power over character. Raymond Alston stepped closer. He said, "Darius, you just saved the company." Darius did not smile. He said no. He paused. Then he said, "I saved the people in it." Simone Price said, "The public is reacting strongly, they are praising you for exposing corruption and abuse." Darius nodded slowly. He said, "Good." Victor asked quietly. He said, "Sir, do you want to see her?" Darius stared out the window for a long moment. Then he said yes. He said, "Not because I want to punish her." He paused. Then he said, "Because I want to look her in the eyes one last time before I let her go." That evening, in a private room at the federal building, Brielle sat across from Darius. Her makeup was gone. Her hair was slightly messy. Her eyes were swollen. And for the first time since Darius met her, she looked small. Not because she was weak, but because her illusion was dead. Brielle whispered. She said you ruined me. Darius stared at her calmly. He said no. He said you ruined yourself when you decided cruelty was strength. Brielle's tears fell. She said I loved you. Darius nodded slowly. He said you loved being above me. Brielle flinched. She said I did not know. Darius said you did not need to know. He paused. He said because respect is not supposed to depend on titles. Brielle sobbed. She said what happens now? Darius's voice stayed calm. He said now you face the law. He paused. Then he said and I file for divorce. Brielle's breath caught like she had been punched. She whispered divorce. Darius nodded. He said yes. He leaned forward slightly. He said I went undercover to find rot in my company, and I found it, and then I found something worse. He paused. He said I found it in my marriage. Brielle whispered. She said please. Darius stood up slowly. He said I hope you become a better woman after this. He paused. Then he said but you will become it without me. He walked to the door. He stopped for a moment without turning around. He said the last thing I want you to remember is not that I am a billionaire. He paused. He said it is that I was your husband, and you still chose to humiliate me. Then he left. Outside, the city lights shone bright. Virelli Global was stable again. The corrupt executives were being removed. The company culture was being rebuilt. And Darius Hart walked into the night with his dignity intact, his heart wounded, and his empire protected. Because in the end, the greatest power Darius Hart ever used was not money. It was the decision to hold everyone accountable. Even the woman he once loved.